My name is Stephanie. I should have known the Craigslist ad was too good to be true. A large, fully furnished apartment in the trendy part of the city for only $500 a month. There had to be a catch, but I was desperate to find a new place after getting evicted from my last apartment for missing too many rent payments. The rental market was brutal, and I'd almost lost hope of finding anything I could afford. So when I saw that listing, I didn't think twice. I called the number and a gruff-sounding man picked up. He said his name was Jim and he was renting out the apartment because he traveled a lot for work. I asked to see the place and he agreed to meet me there in an hour. Jim was waiting outside when I arrived. He was probably in his late 40s, with greasy hair and stained clothes. He led me into the dimly lit apartment, and I looked around in awe. The place was huge, even bigger than it looked in the photos, and it was elegantly furnished with leather couches, fancy artwork, and a giant flat-screen TV. I asked Jim why he was renting that apartment so cheaply, and he told me he just needed someone to watch the place while he was traveling, and he hated for it to sit empty. And as long as I paid the rent on time and keep it clean, I can stay as long as I want. I felt something was off, so I decided to research before agreeing to anything. I thanked him for showing me the place, and I told him I will contact him about the rental application. I could have sworn his eye twitched when I mentioned a rental application, but he composed himself quickly. He told me to let him know if I have any other questions. As soon as I got home, I searched online for the address of the apartment. Sure enough, it came up listed as a vacation rental priced at $5,000 a month. My heart sank when I realized Jim didn't actually own or have any right to rent out the property, and it had to be some kind of scam. But my desperation got the better of me. After a few days of searching without finding anywhere else I could afford, I convinced myself maybe Jim was telling the truth. Or even if he wasn't, maybe I could get away with staying there a few months before the owner realized. I know it was stupid, but renting that place seemed like my only option at the time. So I called Jim and said I was ready to move in. We met at the apartment that weekend and I gave him a $500 cash deposit. He gave me the keys and reminded me to pay rent on the first of the month. Then he was gone. The first few weeks living there were like a dream. I had space, luxury amenities, and a great location. I almost forgot about how sketchy it all was, until one night, when I heard the lock on the front door rattling. I froze, listening closely in the dark. It rattled again, and then I heard the door creak open. Someone was breaking in. Were they going to rob me? Attack me? I couldn't call the cops. I wasn't even supposed to be here. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide or a weapon to defend myself. Heavy footsteps entered the apartment. I could tell there was more than one intruder. Their voices were getting closer as they searched the rooms. Out of options, I squeezed myself under the king-sized bed in the master bedroom. I held my breath and prayed they wouldn't find me. The beam from a flashlight shone around the room. They were right outside the door now. I saw their feet step into the bedroom just a few yards from where I was hiding. They opened the closet and looked under the desk, searching methodically. Any minute now they were going to find me. I braced myself, ready to fight them if I had to. But suddenly we all froze at the sound of police sirens wailing right outside. The intruders swore and scrambled out of the apartment. I stayed perfectly still until I heard the sirens fade away. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled out from under the bed and quickly gathered my things. I had no idea if they would be back, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I drove to a friend's place and crashed on their couch, deeply shaken by what had happened, but also filled with anger and regret toward myself for getting into this situation at all. The next day I went back to get the rest of my stuff when I knew the intruders wouldn't be there. As I was packing up the last of my things, I heard a key turn in the lock. My whole body tensed, prepared to run, but it wasn't the intruders. It was a well-dressed man who looked just as shocked to see me as I was to see him. "Who are you?" he asked angrily. "What are you doing in my property?" I stammered an explanation, apologizing profusely for my stupidity. The man, who turned out to be the actual owner, called the police. They showed up quickly and I fully cooperated, explaining how Jim scammed me on Craigslist. The owner didn't press charges, but banned me from ever stepping foot on his property again. Not that I had any intention of going back there. I eventually found a tiny, overpriced studio to live in. I'm still trying to figure out who broke in that night or what they wanted, but I'll never make a desperate, dumb decision like that again. That terrifying experience in the too-good-to-be-true apartment cured me of taking risky shortcuts. I just thank God I got out of there unharmed. It was a chilly October evening when I decided to peruse Craigslist for some extra work. Money had been tight since I started community college, and I needed to earn some cash on the side. That's when I came across an ad seeking help with home renovations. The listing was vague, simply stating, seeking strong, reliable workers for odd jobs at $20 per hour. That sounded fair to me, so I responded right away. The homeowner, who called herself Carol, got back to me within minutes. She said she needed help repainting her basement and could use an extra set of hands that weekend. Eager to line my pockets, I agreed to come by Saturday morning. After exchanging numbers, Carol sent me the address. To my surprise, it was clear on the other side of town, in a relatively isolated area. I chalked it up to older folks liking their peace and quiet. Still, something seemed off about the whole thing, but $20 an hour was hard to pass up at my age, so I pushed any worries from my mind. Saturday morning arrived, and I loaded up my car with some old work clothes and basic tools. The forecast predicted heavy rain, but I figured I could tough it out for some decent pay. I plugged Carol's address into my GPS and headed across town. The further I got from the suburbs, the more rural the scenery became. I eventually turned down a long dirt road that twisted through dense forest. The rain was coming down hard at this point, making it tricky to see much of anything. After nearly 15 minutes on the dirt road, I finally arrived at Carol's supposed home. To my surprise, in front of me was a decrepit, abandoned shack that looked to be collapsing in on itself. This had to be some kind of prank or setup. I tried calling and texting Carol, but there was no response. Getting a horrible feeling, I went to turn my car around, but the mud and slick conditions forced me into a ditch just short of the shack. I was well and truly stuck. My mind raced about what I should do next. Who was this Carol person? Was anyone even after me? As the rain poured down, I weighed my options. I didn't have any cell service this deep in the woods, so calling for help was out. I could make a run for it or maybe hide in the brush until help arrived. But I also couldn't rule out the possibility that I was overreacting. Carol could arrive any minute wondering where I was. As I sat there debating my next move, the creaky front door of the shack flew open. A figure emerged, barely visible through the trees and sheets of rain. I could tell the person was making their way toward me. My breath grew panicked and my heart pounded. I fumbled to find my keys and get out of there, but it was too late. The figure stood outside my driver's side window, peering in at me. I could just make out the face of an older man, unkempt and deranged looking. In a split second, I decided to run for it. As I threw open my door, the man lunged forward, trying to grab me. I felt his grubby hands swipe at my jacket as I took off into the woods. My feet splashed through deep muck as I dodged trees left and right. The man was close behind, shouting things I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like random gibberish, the ramblings of a madman. At one point, I realized I was running deeper into the unknown woods instead of finding my way out. With the man still in pursuit, I had no choice but to keep moving forward. My lungs burned and my muscles ached, but I was powered by pure adrenaline. Finally, the forest opened up to reveal a 2-lane roadway. I didn't recognize where I was, but help had to be nearby. Just then, a pickup truck roared around the bend, its headlights cutting through the gloomy day. I waved my arms wildly, hoping to flag down the driver. The truck skidded to a halt just past me. Without looking back, I jumped into the bed and shouted for the driver to go. Peeling out, the truck carried me away from that terrifying scene. I watched through the back window as the deranged man emerged from the woods, shaking his fist and yelling inaudibly. After a mile, the driver pulled over and I explained everything. He offered to take me to the nearest police station to report the incident. Though still shaken, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I learned an important lesson that day. No amount of money is worth risking your life over. You never know what kind of unhinged strangers are lurking on Craigslist. My horror story has come to an end, but I worry about who else that man might be luring into his trap. It was a cold, rainy night when I first decided to look on Craigslist for a used car. Money was tight, and I desperately needed a reliable vehicle to get to my new job on the other side of town. As a young woman living alone, my dad warned me to be extra cautious when meeting strangers online, telling me I never know what kind of creep I would encounter. But I was determined to find a good deal, so I scoured the listings every night after work. Finally, I came across an ad for a 2008 Honda Civic being sold for dirt cheap by a guy named Tom. The pictures looked decent and the mileage was low, so I emailed Tom to schedule a test drive. He responded immediately and seemed friendly over email, so we agreed to meet at a coffee shop parking lot the following evening. I arrived early and waited in my car, feeling uneasy when an old rusty van pulled up beside me. A scruffy-looking man, who I assumed was Tom, got out and tapped on my window. My heart was racing, but I took a deep breath and got out to greet him. Tom came out of the car looking to be in his 40s, with long, greasy hair and torn, stained clothing. I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but alarm bells went off in my head, telling me to get out of there. As soon as I got into the passenger seat, I was hit with the overpowering stench of cigarettes, booze, and body odor. I gulped hard and resisted the urge to gag. The van was filthy, with food wrappers, cigarette butts, and mysterious stains covering the seats and floor. Tom got in and started driving out of the parking lot, as I tried to subtly roll down my window for some fresh air. As we drove into a shadier-looking neighborhood, I started visioning escape plans in my head. I'd left my pepper spray at home like an idiot, so I discreetly positioned my keys between my fingers in case I needed to defend myself. "Up here on the left is my place. We can take a closer look at it in the driveway," said Tom. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to go to this stranger's house, but I stayed calm on the outside. "Oh, that's okay. I think I've seen enough of the car tonight. You can just drop me off back at the coffee shop," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't be silly. It will just take a minute. Got to show off the engine," Tom insisted. He pulled into the driveway of a run-down house and parked the van. I hesitated for a moment, then decided I needed to get out of there immediately. "Sorry, but I really should get going. Thanks for the test drive, but I don't think this car is the right fit for me," I said quickly as I fumbled to open the door handle. "Not so fast," yelled Tom as he grabbed my arm forcefully. "You're not going anywhere," he said with a sinister grin. I froze in terror as he pried the keys from my hand and shoved them in his pocket. My mind raced with panic as I realized I was trapped alone with this sociopath. Adrenaline coursing through me, I knew I had to act fast. I stomped my foot down hard on Tom's instep and jabbed my elbow back into his gut. He wheezed in pain, and I was able to wrench myself from his grip. I burst out of the van and sprinted down the street as fast as I could. Tom screamed after me, but I didn't dare look back. I ran around a corner and crouched behind a bush, shaking and trying to catch my breath. After what seemed like an eternity, I peered out and was relieved to see the van still parked down the street. My hands trembling, I managed to pull out my phone and call my roommate Lizzie. She didn't pick up, so I left a frantic voicemail begging her to come get me. As I huddled there in the darkness, too afraid to move, doubts flooded my mind. What if Tom came looking for me? What if Lizzie didn't get my message? Finally, after 20 agonizing minutes, I heard the sweet sound of Lizzie's car horn. I jumped up and raced over to her, nearly collapsing into the passenger seat. I quickly explained what happened as Lizzie's eyes widened in shock. "Jen, you could have been killed. What were you thinking, meeting some random creep off the internet?" Lizzie scolded. I knew she was right. It was a reckless thing to do. I was just so desperate to find a cheap car that I threw caution to the wind. Lizzie dropped me off at home and made me promise to never go meet strangers from the internet again. I awoke the next morning feeling traumatized, but so profoundly grateful and lucky to be unharmed. As I sat drinking my coffee, my dad called to check in. When I told him the whole frightening story, he didn't scold me or say, "I told you so." He just expressed his relief that I came out of it okay. My terrifying Craigslist ordeal was a wake-up call. I decided then and there to only buy cars from reputable dealerships, even if it costs me more. Your safety is priceless, and you should always listen to your gut. If someone gives you the creeps, get out of there. My dad was right. You never know what kind of sickos are lurking on Craigslist.